please silence your cell phones, hold all sidebar conversations to a minimum, and we're going to get started with Between the Slides in 3, 2, 1. What is a firefighter? He's the guy next door. He's a guy like you and me with warts and worries and unfulfilled dreams, yet he stands taller than most of us. He's a fireman. A fireman is at once the most fortunate and the least fortunate of men. He's a man who saves lives because he has seen too much death. He's a gentleman because he has seen the awesome power of violence out of control. He's responsive to a child's laughter because his arms have held too many small bodies that will never laugh again. He doesn't preach the brotherhood of man. He lives it. On episode 28, from Spotsylvania to Situation Unit Leader with Rob Rowley, my good friend Rob Rowley, fire captain of over 20 years of service. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being on, my friend.
Very good to be here. I'm honored. Thank you.
Awesome. So we've talked about this podcast a bit, and for all the listeners out there that have heard me use the generic term, my friends give me advice, my family and ideas, and help shape the show. Rob is a huge part of that, both personally and professionally. So thank you, not just for being on the show, but for helping put the show together, helping make what it is, letting me bounce ideas, whether it's wanting to have a cool, snazzy new logo or, do I rename it? Do I do this or that? Which is an interesting cycle as a, fledgling podcaster that everyone goes through thinking of, well, if I do this, it'll spark this. And then really start coming back to just sticking with what we know, focusing on these people, processes, and progress, and then just having real conversations, like with Mike and Trevor, who we both know as well, that were on the podcast before, episodes 7 and 19 respectively for the listeners. So today we're going to focus on Rob. We're going to, the way I know him, and then we'll turn it over and hear from him, less from me, is from when I was in the health department. We met doing incident management stuff. We'll get into some of that a bit more. And then he and I typically always ended up in the planning section. A lot of times I was resource, he was situation unit. We were plans at each time. We went back and forth. So we'll kind of start on that trail now, Rob, if that's cool. So how did you end up where you are now in the Central Virginia area? Where'd you grow up? Where are you from? What about you?
Yeah, great question. So I started off, I lived my entire life in the Spotsylvania, Fredericksburg area. Honestly, I wasn't one of those folks. I'm not a second generation firefighter. I'm not even a second generation public safety anything. For a lot of my youth, I thought I was going to go into the military. Really got the spark of interest in public safety because of my own problems. I was involved in a car accident at a young age. And so that kind of gave me the care that I received from first responders, firefighters, and the EMTs and the medics, and the difference that they really made in my life is what sparked the interest. So like a lot of folks, at 16, I started to volunteer. At that time, I was still thinking that I was just going to volunteer until I went off to college somewhere. But then by the time I graduated high school, quite frankly, the prospect of going off to college wasn't as enticing to me as the prospect of a career in public safety. And so, so I volunteered from 95 to 99 up there in Spotsylvania. And then in 99, it literally was by then my dream come true when I got hired with the Spotsylvania County Fire Department, which, fantastic department. And over the last 20 years, that department has really that area has exploded. That department has exploded. That department's doing great things. But back in 99, I was drawn to a larger department. And so in 2000, I came to work down here in Central Virginia for a larger, at that time, more metropolitan, more progressive fire department. And so I've worked down here in Central Virginia since February of 2000 and enjoyed mostly every minute of it.
Right. How was that? So you were on with the fire department career for a pretty good chunk of time, and then you moved, and so how was that change? Because did you start completely over, academy and start over and then kind of from the ground up again, even though your experience practically carries over, but as a department to department, how was that transition?
Yeah. So, and that was actually a really good, a good life lesson then that I don't think I realized how good of a life lesson it was. And that's the fact that details matter. So when I came from Spotsylvania and came down here to Central Virginia, yes, I had been riding fire trucks, and yes, I knew how to squirt water out of a hose onto the fire, stuff like that. But to some extent, I really did. I'll be honest, I really overestimated, how much I knew about doing business down here in Central Virginia. And so that's why I say that a lesson to come out of that, and I only wish that I had taken that lesson more to heart back then. But I was young and not exactly the brightest bulb in the box at that time. But the details really matter. So, that's everything from the culture of an area, the culture of an organization, how all of the minor details of day-to-day work get done. If you don't take the time to learn those things, you can really set yourself up for failure on the big things when you minimize the importance of the little things. And so, I would say that I'm probably not too unlike, many folks when they're 19 or 20.
Right.
Was a little overconfident in just how much I knew, and so of course it's easy to say that now looking back, but I was definitely a little overconfident in how much I needed or how little I needed to learn when I came down here from Spotsylvania.
Gotcha. And then so it sounds like the cultural difference, the going from at the time a much smaller department, because then it was pretty small, right, Spotsylvania, then
Sure, right. Yeah.
Into Central Virginia, which has some big departments in it for sure. You could see how the culture shock, and then bringing and I think that's a challenge in general recruitment, isn't it? Right? Do we recruit and hire folks that have experience, or do we want the fresh canvas, so to speak, of recruits? And that's another area I know that from knowing you were actually in recruit training for a while. So looking back at what you just talked about, did that help kind of remind you of your lesson when you would see other folks coming in like that?
Absolutely, yeah. So I spent I did 4 years when I was still a firefighter. Did 4 years as an instructor in our training section, and you hear all kinds of generalizations at complete opposite ends of the spectrum. And on the one hand, you hear over here that if you hire people that have prior experience, they know what they're getting into, and they're more likely to succeed. Okay, there is that school of thought. The opposite end of the spectrum is, if you bring people in that already have that are already set in their ways and have already have methods and systems ingrained in them of how to do things, then we spend our time breaking those bad habits and then teaching them the good habits. And I think that just from what I've seen, the reality is that it's not fair to generalize either way.
Right.
We've had some folks that came on with prior experience who knew what they were getting into, and they flourished because they had a little bit of a heads up of what to expect. We have, there are people that get into this business that have prior experience and still fail miserably, because for whatever reason they just don't have the work ethic, whatever. They just fail miserably. Flip side of the coin, we got folks that come in that have no experience and do get overwhelmed and don't do well in the service and maybe don't last long. But at the exact same time, we have folks that come in with no experience, but they're good people with a heart for service, and they're hard workers, and they hit the ground running, and then they flourish. Once upon a time, I would have felt a lot more comfortable picking one of those generalizations, excuse me. But these days, no way. It is definitely, the individual, case by case.
Gotcha. That makes sense a lot. And from being in the position you're in, helping to kind of mold those folks, I'm sure you got a lot of opportunities to kind of course correct people, either way, right? And kind of give them that, hey, we're glad to have you, but let's just have a chat as far as whether it was you mentioned some of the cultural changes or just getting used to a different area, or hey, let's get some of that humbleness and not assume we know everything.
Yeah.
Even though you've gone through an academy and that kind of stuff, it's, a refresher in life-saving stuff is never a bad thing, right? Pretty critical.
Well, and it's funny, you mentioned the word that to me can be one of your critical skills for success, and that's humble. And again, I hate to admit this, but I don't mind saying this because I hope nobody makes the same mistakes that I made. But being humble and having that humility, it's easy. We all understand the concept of you don't know what you don't know, right? So if you come into something and it's all right. So when you and I started taking jiu-jitsu, and it's just kind of like it was very clear and obvious walking in the door the first time that I have no clue what's going on.
We didn't know it, yeah.
And I already know that I don't know what I don't know, right? So the catch becomes when you get into something and maybe you begin to get just a little bit of experience, right? And you can allow yourself to become overconfident and think that maybe now, I know what I know and I know what I don't know, right? So that was me, coming down to Central Virginia to a larger metropolitan fire department. After spending 4 years in a smaller department, all I did was unfortunately allowed myself to think, I've got an idea of what I know and I've got an idea of what I don't know. And really, it just, you allow yourself to create blind spots, to be honest with yourself about what you still may not know. You know what I mean?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, you got kind of that maturing clarity of reflection and things.
Amen.
So being in training and the advantage that you had and the benefit that it had for you.
Yeah, without a doubt, I would say that the time that I spent in training, without a doubt, was a turning point in my career. So, so first of all, it got me closer and a little more involved in some of the work that happens in administration, right? So seeing some of the behind the scenes stuff that goes into making, much like any organization, making a fire department work, right?
Right.
That roughly coincided with the time when I went back to get my 4-year degree. I'd already done a couple of associate's degrees. I was going back for a 4-year degree, and so that 4-year degree also was actually causing me to do some studying and thinking, quite frankly, about everything from public administration to how public policy and stuff like that affects life on the street, so to speak. So the work on my degree and my time in training were around the same time, and so it really began to open my eyes up a lot to see the world, beyond just what I was used to thinking about as a backseat firefighter. And there's nothing wrong,
right,
with being good at and focusing on the work of being a backseat firefighter, but just really considering the fact that there are more moving parts than that, right?
And is that when you got your nursing degree? Because in addition to being a medic, you're a nurse.
Yeah, so I actually got my RN. I think I finished my RN in 2005.
Okay.
That was something that I just, being a medic, riding ambulances into the hospital and working with nurses and whatnot, just got the interest in becoming a nurse. I got my RN in 2005.
Okay.
I went back for the bachelor's, I think in 2006, and then I went to the training section in 2007.
Okay.
And so while I was up there, it was really kind of just very fortunate in that I started to consider things outside of drag and hose and forcing doors, right? And some activities were coming up related to work involving the incident management team. And so I started getting involved in some of the real task level work of an incident management team. So I was working pre-planned events as a status check-in reporter, right? Things like that. And then, really it was the pre-planned events were great, and it was great getting the reps in. But what really caught my curiosity was, as you know, that was back in some of the early days.
Sure.
Of the development of our Type 3 team here in the region. And so we were still getting classes, and we still had folks coming in like, the Bill Millers of the world, stuff like that, people that, have done Type 1 work, the Scott Kohlers, folks like that, people that have done, significant incidents.
Right.
And the folks that are great to talk to. I'll never forget, one of my best early mentors was a guy by the name of Greg Shuping, who works down in North Carolina, and he mentored me a lot in a lot of my early plans unit work, resource unit and sit unit.
Right.
And so, really seeing, kind of pulling back the curtain on how these teams, relatively small groups of people, go out and employ these techniques and these systems that allow them to manage these, absolutely just horrific situations. And
right.
We're talking about responses to everything from massive fires to hurricanes to landslides, things of that nature. And it really caught my curiosity early on. And then, frankly, once you begin to see the power of how those systems work, and you begin to realize that there's no magic and there's no voodoo, they're fairly simple skills, right?
Right.
And once you figure out that you can apply those to things that you deal with, and then of course, you and I, along with a lot of other great folks around here, starting to work events like the UCI, the BP debate in 2016, I think it was.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. And then of course, obviously some of the civil unrest events that we had here in the Commonwealth, unfortunately. Right. But you're able to see how using those very simple systems that anybody can use,
right,
how much benefit they can have for the boots on the ground, and how much better they can make things for our citizens. How can you not want to be a part of that?
Right. Yeah, I agree. And in 27, so I did that history, which was super cool because I touched on it, and I think we all had it in classes we took, and you get like a just hardly any of it. So do a little more research was cool. And I remember our early 305 class, which I mentioned, had one of the folks that was at LA Fire and helped, do the first ICS meetings. And to your point, we had these folks that are kind of legends in the game, which is kind of a niche community, but they're used to doing these big things, and they're the ones that really ingrained exactly that. Like, this works for anything of any discipline. And that, especially getting into it from the public health angle, I'm glad that we got to see, because it was still super traditional first responder, I'll say, heavy, fire police essentially, or fire EMS combo, whatever, whatever department, was involved or how they were set up. And so it was cool to see that. And then, having those same mentors just being like, hey, get everyone involved, not just, the folks that ride woo-woo machines and, wear cargo pants and stuff. So that was a huge opportunity we had. And I think for us, to give us kudos collectively to everybody that we know and served with on the team, took advantage of it and still do to get the reps. And to your point, it does make people safer, and there's evidence of it in just about everything we've done, from improving sporting events that had, I'll say, less than fantastic safety before we got involved and helped shore up some planning processes, with, simple things like, let's block some roads off and get some medics on standby, and, but to the point, it was the people of making that relationship, right? And then that process you're talking about, that planning P, which we've covered in other things, and I'm sure we'll talk about more. It's hard to get away from it because it applies, to everything really. And so, and actually one of the first things, talking about doing the, initial starting things. One of the first times I think that I remember us working together on an incident, like a missing person, the elderly gentleman that walked off
Yes.
went to the school.
Hmm.
And I think you were doing resource, and it was an opportunity to sell that to one of our law enforcement folks, who then became a huge advocate, who was a little resistant, and then but also to the other folks. And it was just the little things that we helped, like, hey, let's just make sure your people are here, and hey, let's set a schedule, and hey, let's so it wasn't the perfect, we're going to do this like we do in the classroom, but we
Right.
all knew that it never would be like that, for an incident anyway, and that's totally fine.
Well,
So.
and it's funny. So I know, I'm pretty sure everybody listening to this knows about your background. Worked in, gosh, how you worked in public health? How long were you there?
Total, I think about 5.5 or 6 years,
Yeah.
between local, regional, and state positions. But um, in the locality we worked together in, I was there 5 years,
Okay.
or just over.
Yeah, yeah. So I bring that up because the biggest thing I would tell everybody is, if you know people that are maybe a little bit resistant, or maybe even you are a little bit resistant, that is okay, because I will sit here and let my dirty little secret out, that when even when I first got involved in the incident management team and was starting to do a lot of the ICS stuff, and I definitely believed in the power of the systems and the process and all that kind of stuff. But I would be lying if I said that early on, even I wasn't a little bit kind of like,
Hmm.
well, but can we really use this for everything? And
Right.
and so, what really was, again, just I've been so very fortunate, being involved in this stuff. And so, of course, Kevin, you already know this, but when I went back and did my master's degree, my master's is actually in emergency management. And as you
Right.
already know, um, pretty early on in my program, I talked with one of my advisors about doing an internship for one of my semesters. And so, what was your title then? What was your title?
It was local health emergency coordinator. It started off as emergency planner, and then we did more than planning, so they kind of changed it.
That's right. Okay, yeah. So then I came and actually worked for you
Right. Right.
I guess I worked for you for, it ended up being over a year, I think, or just a little over
Was
a
it?
year, I think.
Yeah, about.
Because it started off as a semester and then ended up being just a little over a year. Anyway, the
Yep.
reason I bring that up is that I don't mind saying that time period was still pretty early, first year or two or so in my involvement with the incident management team. And some of those exercises and some of the actual incidents
Mm.
that we used the process for, with the health department, to deal with everything from helping to coordinate resources, to do a TB, an
Yep.
investigation for TB,
Right.
and then another one that was groundwater contamination,
Mm.
that had been contaminated by a dry cleaning facility that
Right.
had basically chemical leaking into the dirt for who knows how
A
many
while.
decades.
Yeah.
Yeah, and doing both of those incidents especially, but that groundwater event where it was public health, it was public works and utilities, stuff like that. Those were some of the incidents that helped me out while working in public health, that um, really cemented just how universal the incident management practices are. And so it was around that time is when I really began to, I don't mind saying, I began to fly the IMT flag pretty high.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I totally agree, and loved it, and glad I got into it from there. A good thing being, from day one for me as a health emergency management, emergency coordinator type person,
Hmm.
is you're from day one the plan chief. And I
Okay.
was like, I remember taking that class online, because I wasn't really a plan chief. I mean,
Sure.
on the document I was, but yeah, same thing, similar, getting into it, taking classes, and then, which is funny, realizing I took a 305 class with folks that years later I would be reintroduced to that, would be, like Snodder and other folks. But yeah, I think a big difference that I saw kind of having, a big chunk of me in public health and then also in public safety was the public health folks were, I will say, overall more open or malleable, right? Because it's not as ingrained. It's a different type of person.
Yeah.
It just really is. It's, but not everyone. It's had the same pitfalls. Some folks wanted to do it how they always did it and all this kind of stuff. But the other thing for us was there's mandates. So like you have to do this every year. We're going to get you a certain number of vaccine. And, it doesn't pay to not do it as realistic as you can when, I've mentioned the mission statement kind of or objective that's always hanging over most public health folks is, you have to give this much vaccine to this many thousands of people in 48 hours.
Yeah.
And so, I was always hugely opposed to giant plans that weren't actionable. So always all in to the point of, that's the IMT public health guy that's like espousing the Bible of incident management to all the other public health folks. And there were variations in some folks, but it led to us being able to also teach that one day class at the conference too, where we could help pull people in and show them really just I think make more simple and direct what they would normally get in a class kind of thing. But it was also us with the folks we would work with in our regions. And so it was a great opportunity. That I'm very thankful that they let us do that because I think that made a huge difference. And we got to pull together actually someone from every IMT in the state at the time, which I don't think we had done before. So that was a cool opportunity to kind of share that knowledge too. So when you got involved in the incident management team initially, what made you gravitate toward the planning section more? Because usually everybody wants to be in operations, right? As we said.
Right. So honestly, it's some of the discussions that we had back then about really where you're going to find utility. And at that time, this was just the reality of how things were on the East Coast. Most of the requests for support were coming in for planning support and logistics support. And,
I gotcha.
Some of that, and we've talked about this. Incident management in some places, and I'm not gonna generalize East Coast versus West Coast, but there do tend to be more places on the West Coast where your localities and your authority having jurisdictions are more familiar with incident management teams because they've been there forever and a day doing the wildfires out there, right?
Right.
You and I both have been places here in the Commonwealth, including out to some western portions of the state when they had some flooding problems a couple years ago.
Not far from where I am now, actually, surprisingly.
Yeah,
Which is odd.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. But there's a lot of places around here where people, there's nothing wrong with them. There hasn't been the occasion for them to hear about incident management teams. So in a lot of places, the incident management teams are still kind of a new concept. And so when we talk about going somewhere and offering an authority having jurisdiction assistance with a planning process, right? That's usually a fairly easier sell. We can even help walk them through the planning process. If we're really good, we can help walk them through the planning process without them ever actually calling it the planning process, right?
Right.
When we show up places and offer to help out with logistical support, help with managing their assets and so forth, that's a little more palatable. When we go to some of these places and tell them that we want to run the operation, right? That's a little less. That's a little. Wait a minute. Hang on a second here.
That's not our stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I tell you, I'm always. I definitely like how our team, our Type 3 team, has done this stuff, and I think it's part of our success. Is that when we interact with these authority-having jurisdictions, and we talk about how much control they want to have over tactical operations, I like the fact that our team is not quick to beat up on these people, right? Because the mayor the mayor of small town rural Virginia, right, isn't necessarily a mean or an evil or a controlling person, because he wants to maintain tighter control over what's happening in his jurisdiction. Some of these folks, they understand that they're still the authority having jurisdiction and they're the responsible party, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so they feel that burden heavy on their shoulders. Secondly, for a lot of these folks, if there has been injury or fatality in some of these small localities, even if they don't directly know the person, they probably know somebody that knew. You know what I mean? It's kind
Talking that, yeah.
Yeah, it's the old 6 degrees from Kevin Bacon, right? Even if they don't know the person that died, they probably know that person's cousin's mother.
Right.
Kind of thing, right? And so even when we talk about doing operations work in some of these places, a lot of it is more like helping to walk them through the process so that they can realize how they can more effectively utilize their resources, or maybe helping them arrive at that moment of clarity where they realize, oh my gosh, I'm going to need more help
right.
than we got here. And so I know you've seen this play out many times, but honestly, a lot of the operations work, incident management team level operations work that gets done on a lot of deployments, it gets done in the form of the planning section helping to walk an authority having jurisdiction through a planning process,
right,
and coaching them and helping them arrive at their own realizations, right?
And that's one of the, from field incident management or incident management team stuff, that action, that work is the closest to me crossover I've ever seen and apply honestly all the time to project management, because we're not the ones that are solving the problem, but we're the ones that can totally help you through the process. And you haven't heard from this person, let me help you get that communication going. And you have this stuff, let me help you with that. So that's where I could see and again apply, and anyone can, that has a good process of helping people talk to each other, sharing resources. Plus, this is, worst day of their life type stuff. It's not like it's a nice calm sit down in a room somewhere. It's, it could be like our team's gone to, it's in the grass where the tornado just went through and their town is jacked up, or this person's missing and the outcome is bad. So, that ability and that strength, and you're right, credit to, you and our teammates that can go in there and accept the fact that we're not going to check all the boxes that the class told us to, because it would be totally inappropriate and crappy to try and do that and try and push it. And that's the way you burn the bridge. And our leaders, which have been great from our team, that's one thing I love, where they stressed it's relationship over process, right? Because, you can push process, but if you kill a relationship, then it's just useless. There's really you should just leave. So, and there's been circumstances where it's gone really well and it hasn't, and that's part of and everyone's lessons learned, too, like that. But, to that, to kind of hone in again on at least what I've seen. So you're overall a plans chief and you could do all those positions too, but it seems like your real niche has been situation unit leader. You've done it a lot for pre-planned events, for some incidents, things like that. I mean, most notably, I think, was, UCI, but you've certainly done it way more than that. So when we go into a place after a tornado or a big planned event or something where we know there's those boots on the ground, there's that agency having jurisdiction that needs real-time updates or the best situation reports or sit reps we can get, what do you think the greatest value of a situation unit is to a locality or our folks on the ground like that, whether we know it's going to happen or, oh crap, it just happened, we got to go help these folks?
Sure. Yeah. So to that end, I would say, and again, talk about some of it's a matter of you putting yourself into situations to be at the right place at the right time. But then also after that, I had been fortunate with sometimes being in the right place at the right time. And so so I definitely was kind of getting a lot of good work as a sit unit, especially on some of these larger events, the pre-planned events, civil unrest events, stuff like that. But I will mention that I think you talk about having kind of like a niche in the sit unit. I think a lot of where that niche came from is when I first started doing work in the sit unit. I started off in the resource unit, got pretty comfortable in the resource unit, and I came over to the sit unit. And the resource unit, critical function, right? Very critical. Having accountability for our resources is of paramount importance. And then all of the decisions that get made based on the numbers that the resource unit provides. Everything from logistics to the liaison officers and some of those discussions. But there are all these tools, right? The 211s, the T cards, all these tools that help the resource unit do what they do. And so then when I first crossed over to the situation unit, and I was like, I was looking around, I was like, where are my tools?
Am I just making maps?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I began to realize is that a lot of folks were still treating the situation unit in the all hazards environment very similar to the situation unit in the wildfire environment. Now, first of all, let me say this:
like behavior and lookouts and that kind of stuff.
Right.
Compass reading and.
Yeah, I have nothing but the utmost respect for all those folks that do all of that work in the wildfire environment.
Oh yeah, it's huge.
Very fortunate. I went out and I spent 10 days back in. I can't remember what year it was, but it was in Washington State. It was a wildfire out there. It was the Chihuahua complex.
Oh wow.
I can't remember what year it was, but anyway, and that situation unit was staffed by some of the most dedicated, hardest working people you could ever imagine, right? But I feel like there's a little bit of consistency in that environment, right? Because what are they looking at in a situation unit in the wildfire environment? They're consulting with the incident meteorologist about the weather. They're going out and they're getting maps to help analyze topography, maps to help analyze fuel types, whether an area is covered with this kind of tree versus that kind of tree versus grass, things of that nature. So a lot of different components that all factor into a very, very big, complicated equation, right?
Right.
But the variables in that equation are fairly consistent. I'm never going to say always, but they're fairly consistent.
Meaning because you're out in the woods. I mean, I know we joke about it because we're all hazards folks, but basically because other than, the past year or two where it's, totally encroached on the interface, but
Sure.
Meaning the environment typically is pretty remote and you're kind of, it's been around for so long. So do you think the maturity of the wildland aspect of the sit unit
there you go.
gives it so much stability?
Exactly. The fact that they are so good at it.
Right. Yeah.
The fact that they've taken their time and they have really refined that process, right? They've got it down to a science. And I don't think anyone that I had found yet had done that unit the same justice in the all hazards environment. So I did the only right thing to do, which is cheat as much as I can, right? So that what does that look like? So I'm talking about sitting down and coming up with, again, those kind of job aids that I talked about that I enjoyed so much in the resource unit that really help you to kind of get your unit moving, to get some traction. Those things didn't exist in the sit unit, so we created them, right?
Nice.
This is things like coming up with a incident informational needs analysis, right? Something that walks us through figuring out what kind of information are we going to need to make appropriate decisions about this incident, and then creating a form that I can use to walk me through that process. Why? Because at 2:00 in the morning, I'm just as out of it as anybody else, and I don't like being set up for failure.
Right.
So that's served me very well, and quite frankly, creating nice little fill-in-the-blank forms has made me look like a rock star on occasions when I was just barely keeping my head above water on an incident.
So
So
do you incorporate this in your process when you're deployed, standing up a sit unit, or
yeah,
planning? Obviously, because you're wearing all the hats until you get some extra help or something. So part of your standard toolkit is now some of those things that you helped innovate and get started.
yeah. And so what I would add to that is this is a pretty good chance to make a plug for a lot of the ICS forms.
Mm.
So, you know, I don't create a form and then go on incidents and fill this form out because I like filling out forms, and I don't do it because I think filling out forms fixes the problem, right? I'm not that stupid. I understand that filling out forms does not fix the problem. But what I do know is this, is that when we have all of the things that we have with ICS, which is common terminology and a common process, that's great. And the way that we make sure that we consistently apply those principles is by using the ICS forms. And, and all that is it's a tool, it's a resource, right? Filling the form out doesn't make the problem go away. What filling the form out does is make sure that we don't miss anything, right? And
Right.
so the example that I've given, many of my classes when I've taught, and I don't mind saying that I was really close to screwing up. Was for a this one was actually a pre-planned event, and was filling out the ICS 204s to go into the incident action plan. And it wasn't until I started to fill out the first 204, the work assignment,
Right.
and I got to the right-hand side of the page, and I began to realize, because of course, if folks don't know this, on the ICS on this work assignment form, we call it the ICS 204. It's the form that tells the boots on the ground where they're going to be working, what they're going to be doing, who they're working for, and all that kind of stuff. Well, another important piece of information is where these folks should report and what time. And it
Right.
wasn't until I was filling that form out that I realized that we had a bunch of people who were coming to this event, and I'm not sure where they were planning on going, right? Because
Oh, well.
they hadn't been told. And if we hadn't filled out the ICS 204, that work assignment, then it would have never occurred to me that we hadn't decided on a reporting location and time. So that's why we fill the forms out, not because it's fun or that it fixes the problem, but those forms are what we use to make sure that we don't miss things.
And they do help guide the process. Like we know, and you mentioned teaching, and you're still active teaching, and we've taught a few classes together. In fact, we taught the sit unit class together in Central Virginia, which is pretty cool, and a couple other ones. I do like how, and obviously I'm a planning guy, so I'm a huge forms nerd. But to your point, that the forms help guide, so that when the form's filled up, did something in my process go a little wonky? But on the other hand, too, we do see folks that do think it's a form-driven process, not a process that's supplemented by forms, just so we can
Right.
give people so they know what the outcome of the good planning was.
Sure.
And that's a huge point. That was something that was driven home to me by Lee, our leader for a long time on the Central Virginia team, and was when I was coming up as a plans chief, was blatantly for him to say, "Why are you sitting there filling out forms?" Like, right? Because I should be facilitating the process, unless I'm the only one there and the first in kind of thing. And even that has its own nuances, which we've done too, where it's like, hey, I don't need to wear these big hats. Like, if I'm only doing this one function of this unit, then I'll just be that or something. But to the point, if you are a plans chief and you're coming in there and you start banging out forms, but you have no idea what the status of the process is, that was a huge, quick lesson for me to hear from him. And
Yeah.
it is, amazing. And one of the forms that you made was you displayed really well, like what was kind of the plan of the day, or what did you call that one? It was and it was a big laminated one, so you could put it up for everybody to see.
Yeah, we had a couple. So one of them, like I said, one of them is the incident informational needs analysis, and then so basically what that details is, okay, whatever the event is, whatever the incident is, what what is the information that we're going to need to make good decisions about this incident. So for example, when we were working that flooding event out in the western part of the Commonwealth, some of the information we're going to need is, Okay, what's the impending weather for this area? Okay, what's the river forecast? Because at that time the river was still above flood stage. What's the river forecast? What are the roads that are currently impassable, right? What's the progress on searches? Just what's all the different information that we're going to need to make, or excuse me, what's the information that operations is going to need to make good decisions, right? And then you got to figure out, okay, where do we get it from? Where do we get the information from? And that could be anything from National Weather Service to radio traffic from the boots on the ground, who knows? And then, okay, how are we going to display the information, right? So we could, getting information is nice, but now we got to make it consumable. So that was one of the forms. We also there's also the contingent scenario matrix, which is not nearly as cool as it sounds. I do like just using the word matrix in there. I don't mind telling you that. But
right.
Anyway, and that was a very similar form, but like you said, both of these were big wall laminates. But on the contingent scenario matrix, basically it's a form that says if these contingencies happen, like so if there's the vehicle-borne IED for some events, maybe it's the heavier than expected rainfalls for other events. Okay, if those things happen, now what kind of information are we going to need related to these contingencies to allow operations to make good decisions? And so, I would mention you mentioned the fact that all these forms were gigantic wall laminates that were just at UCI were on the wall in the situation unit. I used to joke with the folks in the situation unit that I wanted them to be able to function even if I got whacked on the head by a coconut and they took me on a stretcher.
How many folks did you have in the unit working for you?
At one point in time, the situation unit was 42 people.
Wow.
But I never had more than 5 direct reports.
Of course, because you're all the span of control, right?
Yes, that was a FOB manager, so a manager who managed the field observers, a DPRO manager who managed all the information out, the VOST manager, because we were doing virtual operations support team, basically the social media folks.
DPRO display processor.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. DPRO was the display process manager who was a smaller staff. They did things like sit reps and display around the command post and any kind of information going out.
Gotcha.
The collections manager who had the team that basically gathered information from around the command post. So that would be everything from going and listening to radio, traffic from operations, all that kind of stuff. So the joke was always, and we kind of laughed about it, that if I had to leave there because I got hit in the head by a coconut, there was enough stuff on the wall where anybody in there could and actually the FOB manager was the designee, could pick up and run the unit just fine in my absence, which we joked about until the very last day of the UCI event, and literally they had a missing person or a missing child come in, which we had a contingency plan for that. But when the call came in, I was literally in the bathroom, and so I was extremely proud. Actually, Trevor, I don't think we're using his last name, but Trevor was on it. What episode was Trevor? 19?
Well, no, Trevor, 19. Yep.
Yeah, 19 from episode 19. So if you haven't listened to Trevor yet, pretty good buddy of mine. He's on episode 19. Trevor was the FOB manager, and so literally this missing child comes in. I'm in the bathroom, and guess what happened? Exactly what was supposed to happen. They executed our contingency plans to a T. So by the time I washed my hands and got back into the command post, as I walked back over to Trevor, they were already a good solid 2 or 3 minutes into executing our plan to assist operations with finding this missing child.
And fortunately, you followed good public health practices by washing your hands. So
Exactly.
that was huge.
I need to pick up on that.
Do the Survivor days, basically every other slide would have like this, high-speed PowerPoint flashing, wash your hands, wash your hands. One of the greatest. The other thing I think that was one of many, because again, for the whole region, for the state, I'd say even beyond that, because it's the knowledge from that event from UCI has proliferated like everywhere. That I think really helped too. And you talk about building relationships and stuff, or we've talked about that in the process, but that it's super people linked was the connection with intelligence and information sharing.
Yeah.
Right. So the situation unit obviously is they're right next to each other. They're linked. They have to be or should be, I would say.
Sure.
And that's something that had to develop. Even it didn't seem, and you certainly elaborate on it, but even when we clicked the stopwatch on day one of the actual event, there was understanding, but it didn't seem as ingrained as it did, say, on day 4 out of 9 or even beyond, to where it was like, oh, you have these forward observers, these fobs out there that can go send us stuff and we can see it, because, every event, I'll say, has law enforcement folks that aren't dressed like law enforcement folks, right? We'll just generically put that out there. So, it's a good idea to partner with them. Forward observers had no law enforcement. There were folks. In fact, some of them were students, I think, right? Or a lot of them were students.
Yeah, good observers were, yeah.
It seemed like a great opportunity to leverage the manpower to then link that to the folks that could interpret it, decipher it, vet it, and then send folks out there that could make a difference if they needed to. So how did you work that to keep showing them kind of the value of what you could provide as a situation unit?
Yeah, so we you talk about relationships, and you're absolutely right. It all starts there. So we were very fortunate between the situation unit and the I&I section going into the event, where a lot of us knew each other. So there's folks. I won't get into the names, but there's a bunch of folks that were working in information and intelligence, our law enforcement partners, that were very, very accustomed to seeing my ugly mug. And some of that comes from the fact that, we're really fortunate around here. We capitalize pretty well on our pre-planned events to get IMTs together and get folks together, working the process and building those relationships. And so what we had going into this thing were those relationships. What we didn't have yet is really this whole thing about the relationship between a situation unit and an I&I section. We had a lot of good theory, right? But no one had ever seen it. No one had ever seen it actually being executed. And so, understandably, there was a lot of hesitation. And I completely respect that. I like. I'm a freedom-loving American, and I'm quite fond of the idea of being innocent until proven guilty, right? So I want to right for everybody else. So I'm actually very much down with the fact that our law enforcement partners are concerned about the security of information. Completely get it, right? And so finally, what we were able to show over time, and just having a couple of days there at the UCI event, and what we were able to prove working together with our I&I section, is that the I&I section can absolutely maintain informational security while making use of the situation unit as another conduit. And so, all right, so what does that look like? So obviously, there's a lot of stuff that the folks over in I&I know that the folks in the situation unit don't know, and that's okay.
Right.
And that's okay. But also understanding that it's that we're available as a conduit for information that they feel needs to be shared. So for example, we started pushing out as we're pushing out sit reps. The I&I section, may have some kind of information. The worst part is this stuff became so routine that I can't really think of any fantastic examples that stick out in my head.
Routine from the standpoint that the partnership evolve to the point where you all would say, hey, we see these things, and then get it to them, and then say, yeah, that's nothing, or oh, wait a minute, we got a guy a block away, let's send him over there?
Right. Yeah. I mean, just those discussions in general between the sit unit, I and operations. Those discussions became really routine. So for example, the situation unit would have field observers that could go out and let folks know where large crowds were congregating, right? And a picture is always worth 1,000 words. So our field observers wouldn't just go out and send back radio traffic that says, hey, there's a big crowd at the corner of 3rd and Main. No, because there was big crowds everywhere, that.
Right.
They could go out and take a picture and send this picture back to the situation unit back at the command post, who could then share the picture with, the folks in operations and, always the folks at I&I. And so, okay, there's a larger than usual crowd at 3rd and Main. Now operations is making tactical decisions about maybe they're going to shift the location of some of their resources closer to that area. Oh, and the I&I section has someone that maybe they were looking for, whatever they had going on.
Right.
It didn't matter to us, right?
In the shadows.
Yeah, they could let our folks know, hey, any pictures you take in that area, send them over to us. Now, when that stuff happens, did we ask I&I, well, gosh, what are you looking for? Well, no, of course not, right? Now, what are you looking for? Doesn't matter to me. I don't care. But if you want someone to go take a picture of something, I got people that can do that kind of stuff, right? Nice. Similarly, when we were using our VOST resources, so the Virtual Operations Support Team, basically, at that time, honestly, it was, 10 or 12 college kids. For all I know, they were sitting around their dorm eating pizza. I don't really care what they were doing, but they were just, they were surfing social media. And they don't have any special access. They don't have any, they're not doing anything that any person couldn't do, right? But they were deliberately sitting around looking at social media, seeing what they could find. And
like anything related to, hey, there's this group talking about this event a whole lot, or
exactly.
They're really negative, or they're really, hey, like to the point, like your example before, hey, let's get a big group and show up there. And you start seeing it in whatever groups, which is pretty easy. It's essentially open source intelligence gathering, really, or information gathering, yes.
And so open source information gathering, but we had 12 people who were doing it.
Wow.
And of course, who's better at finding stuff on social media than some 19-year-old in a college dorm, right?
Yeah.
And so again, this is another one of those things where, they would find. Maybe a group that was, maybe a little extra active or talking in ways that seemed hostile towards the incident. That information, slide it on over to I&I. And, again, as the SIT unit, do we ask for follow-up? Nope. Of course not. No, we get that information, pass it over to I&I.
But they started though where they kind of would though, right? Where the dialogue certainly opened, not to the law enforcement sensitive level.
Right, exactly.
Where it's like, hey, all right, thanks for this. We did whatever.
Exactly. So that, and the other thing, and again, just because of the fact that we had so many people and there was the force multiplier, occasionally they would ask the VOST resources, hey, do me a favor, look around on social media and see what you can find related to, and I always joke about this, but let's say something to do with a purple fun wagon. See what you can do with purple fun wagon and see what you can find on the social media. And so now we've got 12 people who are really motivated, looking at hashtags, everything from purple fun wagon to fun wagon purple. They got the time and the bandwidth to really chew on this stuff, and they did get some results.
Rob always with the unique examples.
We do what we can. So in the end, we ended up having a beautiful relationship between the situation unit and operations and I&I. And again, I think some of that gosh, when you get trust, you keep it, right? And then also, at the same time, also do understand your lane. And, for the folks in the sit unit, I think that it didn't hurt that we had pretty routine unit meetings.
Right.
That would include at least myself and all 5 or 6 of the various managers, even their deputy managers and some of the folks from the command post. And we would just check in and see, hey, how are things going? And we would have those dialogues. And
and you did unit level meetings leading up to and during.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And would you recommend that as a practice, particularly if it's something is coming down the road, as far as keeping the tempo, the pulse of your unit or section even, but in this instance, unit.
And especially if you've got a unit so big where you've got 5 or 6 managers, I have no problem admitting this. This goes back to those first 3 things that we talk about with incident management: have your objectives, get organized, and get resources. Right. Well, as you can imagine, when you're looking at doing something that's big enough of a lift to where you end up with a 42-person situation unit,
yeah,
it's the same thing. Get organized, or get your objectives, get organized, and get resources. And part of that, when we talk about getting organized and getting resources, is get the right people, right? Get them in there, make sure they understand their objectives, and then let them work. And so, I don't mind telling you, Trevor, as the FOB manager, I would guess that 90% of the time, if you had asked me where a FOB team is, I would have had no clue. But I could have said, Trevor knows, because he did. Because he understood the expectations. He got equipped, got everything he needed. He let his FOB teams know what he expected of them, right, with routine radio check-ins. I forget the rules, kind of the rules of engagement we had set up at the time, but
gotcha.
They had to check. I think it was every 15 or 20 minutes.
Just like getting up, personnel got a report kind of a part.
Yeah, or if they moved so many blocks.
Oh, okay. Were they tracked? Were they on GPS or no? Just phones?
Yeah, they were phones and radios.
Okay.
But yeah, and like I said, don't quote me on the numbers. I bet you Trevor still remembers, because he worked his behind off on that map for 9 days tracking this. At one point in time he was tracking like 8 FOB teams, but I think it was every 20 minutes, or if they moved 3 blocks, they had to call in with location.
Nice. So the message obviously was clear. Set the expectation, let them run and operate. Yeah, I thought. I had 28 in the resource unit across the room. I was like, man, we have a lot. And you're like, I didn't realize you had just about double that. That's amazing. But similar thing, I think, because too, we had an opportunity to get really great people that we knew we could go. And same thing, we use managers too, because we ended up folding in demob because it's just easier that way. But same thing, the folks that we had involved overall, but in our respective units, same thing. Could say, oh, how many do we have now? And they could shoot out the numbers and what was the last par check count and et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, the situation unit being that big, the connections you had, were you co-located, or did you have kind of an embed when you had that flow with the information and intelligence section, the I&I folks and ops sitting over there with them? Because you guys were all kind of triangulated a bit near each other, I think.
Yeah, we had two pre-designated sit unit to I&I liaisons.
Oh wow.
I wish I could tell you one of the guys' names, because they were both fantastic. But one of them in particular was just incredible to work with. Just great working relationships. And, of course, I'm just nerdy enough. I learned a lot, frankly. And he was willing to talk to me about it, because we talked about some of the legal ramifications of, when they're doing things like handling information for persons of interest and stuff like that. It was, now don't get me wrong, I wish I could sit here and tell you that I remembered all of it, but I definitely do not. But I learned a lot.
Well, and you're not in that space every day either, so totally get it. It's just like when we talk IMT stuff to other people, like, oh, that's cool, and then they don't care about it because they're not, or don't have to retain it from their jobs for sure.
Right. Well, and I tell you, it's funny you bring that up. So, because there have definitely been times in my career when I've definitely felt like more of the GI Joe of IMT than sometimes more than others, and so I definitely can't recommend enough to folks, getting around this stuff, whatever that looks like. So, again, I'm very fortunate, have built some relationships with folks over time, so that I think Trevor mentioned the DuPont SAR-X, which is a very large search and rescue exercise that also has a really good IMT component.
Nice.
Happens every November down in North Carolina. So making those relationships, finding out about these large events, even if you can't go be a primary player, if you can get in there in a shadowing capacity, which you know as well as I do how people in IMTs are. If you can get your foot in the door somewhere in a shadowing capacity, it's going to be about 30 minutes before someone puts you to work, right?
Oh yeah, you'll be doing something.
Yeah, we like most people that do this incident management stuff, they want to see folks succeed, so you get your foot in the door somewhere, and the next thing you know, you showed up as a status check-in recorder shadow, and the next thing you know, you spend half a day as a status check-in recorder, and oh geez, you've gotten everything you can out of this. Come on over here and help me work out this 215 during the next tactics meeting, right?
Right.
So just get involved, and even if opportunities like that are hard to come by wherever you are, just even stuff like this, listening to a podcast like this, just let some of that verbiage bounce around in your head, keep it fresh, because it'll go stale pretty quick.
I mean, so that like, some of the kind of focusing on the progress of making that progress. So coming out of the department new, a lot of the guidance is, hey, first get good at your job, right? So whatever patch badge type you wear, or non, if you're in public health or whatever. So, talking about this, but we do know some folks that early-ish, and I guess they're not, like year one or so, but some folks, which I think is refreshing to see, some folks that are newer that don't have to have the white shirt, which we saw early too, to go to the training with some exceptions, so to speak, but can get into it. What about for the folks that are, 5 to 10 years in, on a department, that are just like you were talking about, is, hey, get around it. What if their area doesn't have an IMT? So, because a lot of smaller places don't, and even, smaller regions don't, and we see that. So they don't get the opportunity like you did to work at training, which I think part of that, you get more of a stable schedule, right, which is helpful. Obviously, shift work is extremely hard to do.
Yeah.
Which, although I mean, you've done it for sure a ton, and we know folks that have. So, someone 5-10 years on not just the fire department, but any department that listens to this, that's kind of seeing it creep around their area, how should they take that first step to really get involved? And you mentioned shadowing, and us sitting here being where we are, the experience we have is kind of easy to say that, right? Because we did it. So how can you, what would you suggest to them, coming from the boots on the ground firefighter to now you're a captain, to knowing where you were, getting into the IMT, of making those opportunities? How would you suggest they do that?
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. I mean, obviously, here in Central Virginia, we've got a lot of opportunities that may not exist other places. So the first thing that I would tell anybody is, oh, gee whiz, again, just don't do what I did during my especially 5 to 7 year mark. But if you're that 5 to 10 year mark, somewhere in there, attract the flies with honey, not vinegar, right? So understand that if you're trying to influence change up your chain of command, understand it's very likely that the folks above you are busy with a lot of different things, and may not be very receptive about hearing that someone wants to pile something else on their plate, like this incident management team thing. So what I would say is figure out who you can talk to, who in your department you can talk to that's informed and may possibly be a decision maker. So who's that person a couple ranks above you that you can talk to and say, hey, been learning a lot about this incident management team stuff. It seems like something that could be of benefit, and always be ready to show the benefit. So, it seems like it's something that could be of benefit to our department. It seems like that there are ways that we could get involved. What do you think? And ask those folks, what do you think? What would you see as being possible advantages to our department being involved in a larger incident management team initiative? And what do you think would be the barriers to our involvement, right? Or if you want to see these practices come to your agency, because even if you aren't involved in a larger, like a regional team or something like that, there's no doubt there is value to just bringing these skills back to even just your agency, right? So even if you're just one health department, one fire department, one sheriff's department, or whatever, even if you're not going to work with other agencies, there's value to bringing these skills just into your department. And so then, you know what? Hey, that's okay. That's a good starting place. So the question then is, how can we? What support do we think that I can get from the agency to possibly go learn some of these skills so that I can bring them back to the department, right?
And I was going to say that's a great point. So we're at like an hour and 13 minutes and good stuff. And we haven't even touched on local IMT work, right, which feeds regional teams a lot, or kind of the opposite, which we've seen. The regional team felt, kind of helped other folks mature their local teams.
Right.
But to your point, so the Type 4 local team, is that opportunity. So even a locality or even, I guess, a department specific or a mix of all those opportunities exist. And that's a whole other avenue where it's your sporting events, it's your festival you have every year in your city or county. So you don't have to rely on, is our team going to get a call out for this or that? Are we going to be able to manage events early? And really some teams and the Central Virginia included is kind of matured, so to speak. So we did a lot of pre-planned stuff early, and now it's really a response asset or providing support asset a little beyond. But it seemed like, and you were super early in the local IMT development like that. So and it sounds like your strategy of getting those right folks as mentors, the folks that can clear the path, and it sounds like kind of queue it up to have them tell you how the benefit can be, but you also have that benefit, that shows, because at the local level, and kind of coming back to that, is really where you get tons of reps in using it. Like I know you were heavily involved in a painful subject, a fire of a boat, right?
Indeed.
That happened.
Indeed.
But again, it wasn't a regional team call out that came to support that, right? There may have been some partners there because of where things happen and all that kind of stuff, but it was your local team, your skill sets that did it. And so for the folks wanting to get involved, I mean, that's a huge thing. And even the day-to-day, more tactical level, and of course, again, fire starting this whole system, day-to-day, has been a huge driver of it. As well. But so for the kind of stretching out, so you're 20 plus years, right, in service. So kind of going from the folks starting out or the folks getting some years in or midway. So how do you stay engaged where you are, right? So folks going through their career, their public safety career, has this IMT work helped you with that as far as, not that by any means is like being a firefighter a boring job at all. But like any job, I would imagine as a career path, it's a challenge and there's all this stuff. So what would you say to folks as far as the incident management team helping you stay engaged with your department wherever you are in the long term?
Yeah. So I don't mind admitting I've always been a little bit of a energetic and sometimes vocal kind of definitely have a passion for what I do, definitely enjoy it and believe in what we do in the fire service. But I would say that without a doubt, being involved in the incident management teams is why I got promoted to lieutenant, and then definitely why I got promoted to captain. Because, and I say that specifically because, I go to work and enjoy training, enjoy all of the firematics and all that kind of stuff, and then my time in training, as well as some formal education, again began to open up my eyes, get sort of the larger worldview, kind of understand that the fire department is just one part of local government, and then how that interacts with the community, and then really being involved with the incident management team is what gave me the opportunity to actually develop skills related to that knowledge, right? So I began to develop knowledge about how relationships matter, began to develop knowledge about how the fire department is just one part of the larger local government, serving the community and all that kind of stuff, right? Began to get that knowledge. But the actual work with the incident management team is what gave me the opportunity to really refine and frankly prove my skills related to that knowledge. So I have no doubt in my mind. Lieutenant maybe, but captain, there's probably no way I would have made captain if I hadn't been involved in the IMT.
And that is a great example, and certainly you earned it, all around, but a great example of that life applicable skills you get, right? And so to your point, kind of hitting the three bolded areas we talked about, so the relationship building skills you get from dealing with people when you show up, either, which are different skill sets, but huge, right? Show up somewhere where you don't know anyone, or you're in your backyard and you're dealing with people that you do know, which is a whole different set of negotiating type stuff. We'll say that the PPE, people, politics, and egos, right, that exists everywhere in all localities. And then the process, and not that you walk everyone through the planning P like every time you're at work or somewhere else, but the fact that like you mentioned, the kind of big three of the adding communication for kind of foundation of four thing of, like, if we do these, we can reorganize the office, or we can do whatever other thing that isn't looking for a missing person, or any other kind of incident management type thing. And then it's cool to hear the progress that you've made as a part of these skill sets. I mean, and putting the work in and the time. And I think that's a big thing too. And I know I've mentioned it probably a few times. I know we've talked about it a ton, is you have to put the time in, and a lot of it's going to be paid in smiles, right? So if you really want to make a difference, but to your point, it can have tangible benefits in the long run, right? Not just monetary, not just rank. Those certainly, matter for sure.
Yeah.
But also in, just getting better at like everything. I mean, I don't think it's too big to say that, to be honest with you. It just helps you formulate and bring things together for sure.
Absolutely. Agree completely.
Nice, man. Well, how can folks learn more? Because I know you teach pretty often still, right? Or you teaching?
Yeah. So right now I'm kind of at a season of my life. So it's what, June 23rd right now.
23rd it is, yeah.
Yeah. So we're my fiance and I are on the home stretch of nailing down the sale of the house and the finalizing of plans for a wedding in November.
Dang.
Yeah, you're telling me. So, wait a minute, you're in.
Oh yeah, that's right. Might be there.
But so that's keeping me a little bit occupied these days. But still get to do a fair amount of teaching, and I'm sure that next year I'll be doing a little more. Now definitely I would say I would be. I'd be extremely interested to hear, from any of the listeners, any feedback, or certainly if anyone can relate to any of the stuff we talked about, by all means, I'd be curious to get that feedback.
Right. Yeah, I can. And again, so good segue to the contact information, right? Which, so betweenthe-slides.com's got links to all the socials, but Facebook, PSC to PMP. On Instagram and Twitter, I'm at PannellKG, PANNELLKG. So I'll push out new episodes, this one included, obviously, with links and such. And on Between the Slides, my email's there, so you can get in touch with Rob through me. And Again, we can share his knowledge if you have any questions about fire service, incident management. One thing we didn't get into either is you've done quite a few like endurance challenges, including like the World Police and Fire Games, right?
Fun stuff.
Is that what was the event in the Police and Fire Games? What was more than?
Yeah, for that one I did up in Fairfax. I did the tower climb up there as well.
Gotcha. So was it like, it was not just, but so it was a climb. It wasn't like the Scott Challenge type thing and a climb, like, with all the different events, the sled and that kind of stuff.
No, so the if folks are interested, they should look this up. If there's the World Police and Fire Games, it happens every 2 years. It came to the U.S. for the first time in a little while. It was in Fairfax in 2015. I went up there for that. In 2017, it was in I forget where. It's in I think Chengdu, China this year.
Wow.
I think it's back up in like Germany or something like that in 2 years from now. But it's kind of like a little mini Olympics.
Oh wow.
Yeah, they call it the Police and Fire Games, but I think it's really any of your uniformed public safety folks can sign up for that. It's a really good time. It's a heck of an event. If anyone ever gets the chance, compete, go watch, whatever. It's good times. But I will say, related to the Instagram and the Facebook, I do I enjoy Kevin's posts with his progress in jiu-jitsu. It's a little extra motivation I need every now and then to go ahead and get my gi and get my butt over to the gym.
It's good stuff. As you know, Rob and I trained together at Revolution Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Richmond, Virginia area, which I highly recommend. Awesome people, awesome instructors, good partners. Had a couple roles, couple pajama fights over there. I'm actually going to Team Manning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Blacksburg, where I'm at now, which is cool. Of course, small world when you get in the high level, so our instructors know each other and stuff. And yeah, definitely, as we both know, we're both Jocko podcast fans. So the morning workout post, sharing it, and it really does. I know I've done a podcast on this as well, and we talk about it all the time. It made a huge difference in my life for the better, but also others. So I've seen that proliferate. In fact, one guy, Scott, that actually we train with, or you train with now at Revolution, and some other folks have said, hey, when you post, what's up with the time? Or hey, I'm going to start doing those workouts that you do, because I usually get up early. I've gotten up a little bit later at like 6, not 5:30 or whatever, but I think that's the whole thing, and that's why I love this podcast or posting stuff that helps people on social media. Not just like the duckbill kiss picture of me and something nobody cares about, but I tell you what, those things are popular and those people make a lot of money or whatever. But yeah, so to the point, I like doing it because it's also the accountability check, right? Oh, guess you slept in, didn't get out there. It's funny when you do it though. At first everyone's like, oh, cool, that's great. And then, the likes go pew and hit the tank. But again, you don't post it just for the likes anyway. You post it, make a difference like it has, which is cool. So.
Yeah. No, I would say, I think, for all the things that there's group think about, group encouragement, heck yeah, why not? So I'd be kind of curious to see any of the folks listening to this. Make sure you put some of your pictures on there. I tell you,
yeah, absolutely.
Folks throw their pictures of their let's be super ICS nerdy. Put your ICS 215 wall chart forms up there on the on the social webs.
Comment on the organization or give us your 2 cents. Then we'll truly fall back to the quote I led last time, and we'll be the cynics pointing fingers, but fellow incident management practitioners lending their 2 cents for the better. We'll say, which sounds a lot better. Well, that's good. Cool, man. Well, thank you very much. Look forward to catching up in person soon for sure. And thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah,
Yeah, take care.